and showing your plan to fix the things that you've identified. When you can show sort of just not just that you did it once, but that you are constantly on the lookout for that, it shows the carrier that you actually have a culture of safety, that you have a culture of risk improvement, and beyond any one moment of time of here's your premium based on the market conditions and your losses as of this moment. What they're really looking for is a client that is going to constantly be looking to mitigate risk and to prevent things from happening in the first place. And so when you can show that that's just ingrained in your business, regardless of what line of coverage we're talking about, those are the kinds of companies that carriers, really want to fight over, quite honestly. And so, to the extent that you can show that, not only have that kind of culture, but show it, that's really, that'll put you in a pretty good position.
Hmm. So one of the reasons I had you on, Xander, is because I think you think about this whole process of getting insurance just a little differently. And let me put it in my own words. You can tell me if I'm getting it right. You don't look at risk as something that is just you put a price tag on it. Uh, Risk is something that you start to build a series of processes and a culture of managing.
Mhm.
So when you come and take a look at a company, you start to help them understand where that risk is, the risks that they're trying to mitigate, and then put the backstop of insurance behind it because it's really a larger process. And by putting that process in place, you're actually kind of trying to help them also reduce the risk and the story that they can tell the story to the carrier. Did I did I accurately lay that out?
Sure. I mean, so insurance is just one tool in the toolkit. We don't go into this with an insurance first approach, uh, because that's not always the answer. Or traditional insurance, as we all think about, is not always the answer.
Give me an example. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's a financing mechanism. So if we want to just sort of break that out, if you're on the medium to larger side um, of of companies, and you've got some size to your fleet and you've got some size to your company and you're paying some pretty substantial premiums, naturally the question will come at some point of, do you want to own some of the risk? And so you don't always just want to transfer all of that to an insurance company. You may, if you're having a lot of losses, you want to, because you want somebody else to own that risk. You want somebody else to pay for those claims. But if like I said, we're in a hardening market right now. Prices are going up for the same coverage effectively. And if you're looking around and you're seeing your premiums going up, but you're not having any losses or few, you may want to start asking, well, do I want to own some of that risk? And there's a lot of different ways that you can structure that. But so that's one conversation just on the insurance side. But for any risk issue, insurance is the last line of defense, no matter how you structure it. It's not the first line of defense. You want to, once you understand a risk issue, and one thing I like to say is sort of, um, the atomic unit here is the risk issue. Once you identify what that is, then you determine what you want to do about it. So yeah, insurance is foundational to any business and their plan to protect their company, but it's not the only thing. You want to the extent possible, you want to avoid any opportunity for loss. Now, that's not necessarily possible if you're in business. You're naturally exposed to risks of all kinds just for operating. But to the extent possible, you want to prevent any losses from occurring and you want to contain the ones that do. And so you, by being proactive, by getting access to tools, softwares, advice, other resources to help you, sort of reduce the need for that insurance, reduce the potential frequency or severity of any one loss. You do that over a long enough period of time, then you use your insurance less, which drives down your insurance costs. So insurance is the last line of defense, but it is just one of many, I guess, strategies that a business should take once they identify a particular issue.
So we've got more people that have joined in. Thanks for joining in. Tell us where you're joining from. Would love to see who's on. Thanks for joining in. If you'd love to tell us what brought you to the podcast and what kind of tickled your interest and made you make some time in your day to come listen to Zander. Love to understand what it is that got you to set aside that time. Please feel free to comment and just tell us who you are, where you're from. All right, so Zander, when I first talked to you, my understanding of the whole insurance industry was there's this kind of black box process that it goes into. I'm hearing a lot of variability in how these things are judged. It's left up to, I'll use a word here, human intuition to some degree, right? It's their best guess. But you work with multiple carriers. Why? Why does that matter for somebody? If you work with one carrier, could you not get the same thing as if you went with multiple carriers? Is that not the same thing? Tell me more there.
Well, the commercial market is vast. There's a lot of different industries out there. Any one carrier does not have an appetite. When I say appetite, a desire to insure every industry out there.
Give me an example.
Pest control companies and the carriers that insure pest control companies could be very, very different than the companies that insure fast food restaurants. And that's
so that they don't like the risk that comes with that particular type of business. So, and nobody's got a coverage for everything. Even the gigantic names that we hear of in terms of carriers, they don't cover everything as well.
No, definitely not. No. Sometimes they specialize in size of companies. So some carriers are much better at smaller businesses, and some sort of put all their expertise in, resources for the larger companies. But it's a deliberate decision that they make, either because of expertise they've got, or all kinds of models. And there's so much data that goes into how you enter an industry for a carrier, which is way beyond sort of the scope of my knowledge set. But it's, they're making deliberate decisions based on, sort of strategic goals of a company, of what industries they want to insure.
Okay.
And so every company has a different appetite. And beyond that, every carrier's got different experience. And so, carrier A might, for any given industry, they might have a great experience insuring pest control companies. And if they've had a great experience, and again, I don't want to get too granular, but they're also maybe looking line by line: general liability, auto liability, workers' comp. But from an industry perspective, they might have, one company for any given industry might have a great experience, and that means their pricing can be more competitive. Whereas another company just, maybe previously they had more lax underwriting, and they brought in too many bad apples into their risk pool, got burned on it. And now their experience, their loss ratio, their combined ratio is high, and they've got to be more diligent, or their pricing's got to be higher. And so there's also individual differences that carriers have that absolutely affect, the pricing that you see from them. So, it's important to have access to multiple carriers, because, there's different situations and different, reasons why I would go to, company A over company B for any given business. It's very, very dangerous. And that's the difference between the captive model and captive insurance company model. There are captives, which are something completely different, but captive companies and independent companies, State Farm versus a Travelers, say.
So actually, this actually brings back something that I'd thought about a little earlier. I mean, I've got some real estate investments myself, and one thing that I've learned as doing real estate investing is that just going to a traditional bank and just getting a 30-year mortgage, a 30-year note, is what a lot of people get, but that's not the only way to finance a house. There's lots of other, I mean, home equity lines of credits. If you got a credit card that's got a large enough line, right? There's lots of different ways that you can do that. And one thing you talked about a little earlier is that insurance is actually just a financial instrument to finance a loss or a risk.
Mhm.
There are other ways to finance it outside of just going to State Farm or to Travelers, as some of the bigger names that people know. There's smaller carriers. There's other types of ways. Is that also a true statement?
Yes, definitely.
And can you give people access? And is that something that a broker can do? Or is that something that you do, that all brokers do, where they give people access to these other alternative financing instruments that open up more options?
Yeah, I mean, we can do it, and everybody definitely doesn't. And a lot of it just depends on the clientele that an agency, is really geared towards. Um, we do it. Plenty of others, around the country do it as well. Captives are a big example, and there's that's a sort of a big, that subsection is a whole big word, a whole big world. But there's a number of different instruments to do it, but ultimately the really the first question you would want to ask when you're considering something like that, some sort of alternative risk financing, is, do you want to own some of your risk? And you see, you've been paying premiums to a company for years and years and years. Are you getting, um, what are you getting for that premium? And in some cases, hey, listen, they've been paying claims, and that's great. In some cases, you've never had claims, and you maybe are at a level where you decide you do want to own some of that risk, and then there's ways to structure that. You got to be able to have a certain size to you, because you've got to be able to fund for losses to some extent. Um, if you've got one or two vehicles, this is you can't necessarily generate enough premium to fund for even a single loss that you might have.